My name's Amy Wright. I'm a PT here on the island. I work with Erin.
And I'm Erin Chadburn. We work together. We have kind of separate business names. Our businesses function separately, but we're together in the same space.
Which is right over there.
Which is right across the street from right now.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us. So we're here to talk to you about the importance of mobility of your entire body, all of your joints, and how it pertains to cycling.
Yep. So I feel like mobility is a term that has become sort of a fad lately. Seems like everybody wants to improve mobility or give you mobility, help with mobility. So we thought a good place to start would just be to talk about what mobility really is. Because a lot of people think of mobility and flexibility as being sort of a similar idea. This is our impression of what flexibility means to us. Flexibility is sort of a passive stretching or a passive ability to move your joints to their end range of motion. A lot of times people sort of have flexibility or they don't. But for mobility, I think the big difference is that mobility is really active control. So not just can you push your body into a position passively or with some external force, but can you bring your body into that position with control and then move it out of that position with control. That's what I think is important and what Erin thinks is important and what mobility means to us. So this would be more of a person with good mobility. So she clearly has pretty good flexibility, but she has the ability to hold herself in that position. And presumably she got in and out of it on her own, but we don't really know. So flexibility plus strength and control is what mobility means to us. And it really is directly corresponding to your movement potential. So without mobility, you're never going to reach the level of performance that I think most people want. With flexibility, you won't either. You need that control. You can't just have strength or just flexibility. You need to be able to control the motion. All movements that we do every day, whether they be athletic or more day-to-day stuff like reaching up to get a cup from the shelf, they all are made up of smaller movements. I think everyone understands that. And all of those movements have sort of basic prerequisites that your joints need to be able to do in order to achieve that. So the example we gave here is someone about to do a pull-up. To even be able to think about doing a pull-up, I think most of us logically can understand that you want to have full shoulder range of motion. If you're going to hang from a bar and then pull up your body weight, your joint should be able to support that. So that applies to a lot of athletic things that we do. And I think in our practice, we see that idea being kind of lost sometimes because people will show up and say, oh, I want to do this, but then you check their basic joint range of motion and they really can't do that based on what their body is able to do at that point in time. So I think another key to mobility is just going back to the basics and saying, is my body functioning well enough to do what I want to do? And if not, then we're going to start there. It's day-to-day stuff, job duties, depending on what you do for your job. Everything is safer and easier if you give yourself the prerequisites that you need to do those things. It helps prevent injury, improve the health of your joints, and maintain the cartilage in your joints. So again, that's sort of a basic principle that we're going to talk about as we get into more of our ideas on how to improve mobility and joint function. It's just good to know that all these things are helpful in preventing injury as well.
Right. We're going to talk a little bit about the science, and then we'll actually kind of go into a demo to show kind of how we think mobility should actually be trained. So there are two main scientific principles that we use kind of as the foundation of our training. So the law of progressive adaptation is essentially saying that in order to change the structure of connective tissue, you have to progressively load it with force. and that force is what actually stimulates your body to start to make those physiologic cellular changes. And then the law of specificity is saying that the force has to be directional. So it's not just that you can just put any type of force into a tissue, but that if you want that tissue to change in a certain way, the force has to be applied in that direction, under a certain amount of load, be held for a certain amount of time, as well as eventually be trained with like potential speed. Like, do you need slow control? Do you need fast control? Just that the force has a lot of like specific needs as to how it will change the tissue at that cellular level. In application to your body, oftentimes we hear from people like, I stretch all the time, but if I don't stretch every single day, I don't keep the flexibility gains. And oftentimes what that's telling us is you're starting too superficial. So our tissue is all interconnected, our body is all interconnected, and you have to start in at the deepest tissue in order to make a lasting change. If you stretch your hamstring every day, and unless you do it every day, you don't keep that motion, it's probably because something deeper than your hamstring is tight, oftentimes your hip capsule. So when we start to look at a person's movement, we want to figure out what is the deepest tissue that is restricted, and how can we affect that first and systematically work our way out so that these changes do become permanent and what we refer to as plastic changes. The way we can train our body is within these 15-degree increments. So our nervous system, so outside of the actual connective tissue, our nervous system has the ability to control 15 degrees of kind of where you're training. So if we're talking about hip flexion, if I can get to here, my nervous system and the muscles around that motion could control 15 degrees above or below that. And so when we want to work in small incremental motions so that your nervous system then has control over the complete range of motion. Because the other thing that we oftentimes see is people who do a lot of sustained long hold stretching, but then don't train their nervous system to control it, oftentimes will have pain or some type of hypermobility. We see this with yoga a lot, where you're doing a lot of sustained stretching, but you're never really learning how to control your nervous system into those new ranges. So you'll create some hypermobility, and so your body will do one of two things. It's going to let you go there, but you don't have control, so then eventually you'll have pain, or it's not going to let you go there. And that's oftentimes I have to stretch every day to get back to where you're going. So you have to make plastic changes in the connective tissue by holding force for prolonged periods, but you also have to gain that neuromotor control, and that goes back to that definition of mobility, of it really has to be flexibility plus motor control, and that's what gives you mobility, which is what gives you functional use of your joint. Why you guys are here, cycling. So there are a lot of different things that are important to cycling. From our perspective, probably the most important thing is your hip range of motion. It's also, I don't know if Amy would agree with this, but what I would say, it's probably the tightest joint on people.
Yeah, I think it's probably the most dysfunctional joint on most people.
And the reason for that is because we sit in chairs. We are not a squatting society, so squatting societies who rest and hang out here fully and maximally use their hip capsule. We use our hip from about here to there. And so it creates a lot of tightness. It's where sitting societies see a higher rate of hip and knee arthritis driven around that tightness. So especially in road biking, you know, this is a racer. You guys probably know what racer, but so they're in an aggressive position. But even so, if you're on a road bike, you need a significant amount of hip flexion, and oftentimes our hip capsules are tight enough that we don't actually have that range.
It's also, sorry, one sec. I think it's also where the whole weekend warrior type of thing comes into play, possibly with cycling, although if you're a bike commuter, for instance, and you're really cycling every day, hello, microphone, maybe not as much, but if you think about someone who sits most of the day, and then let's say they go out to Crystal on the weekend and now they're asking specifically their hip joint, but also their knee joint, their ankle joint, to move in a very multi-plane dynamic. It gets back to the speed of loading. You know, it's quick loading with a lot of force. You can see how you're not really prepared for that. So getting injured is, I don't want to say it's a foregone conclusion because obviously not everyone gets injured, but it's more likely unless you're preparing yourself during the week.
Is neck pain. And part of that is you've put extra weight on your head, and our heads already are heavy, but our upper backs are really stiff. So we have these stiff, rigid thoracic spines, and then we just have to rely on our somewhat hypermobile neck to allow us to see forward. And so if we could move our thoracic spine and move our upper back more efficiently and allow it to contribute to the motion, we would be able to unload our neck. Typically, our neck stabilizers are also pretty weak because we sit in front of computers in bad posture.
Posture kind of mimics seated bad posture in some ways. So.
Yeah. You know, a really aggressive position, you know, his neck is in the like painting the ceiling position, which is not somewhere where we would typically want you hanging out for hours and hours on end. So the more your upper back can contribute, the better. And so that takes us through thoracic spine. We tend to be really stiff. Our ribs make our upper backs stiff, which is great for protecting our vital organs, but not as great for our lower back and our neck, which end up kind of making up for that stiffness and having to move more. Just kind of going down, you know, knee and ankle range of motion are important just to get over. Generally, cycling is relatively nice. Cycling should be nowhere near your end range knee motion, and if it is, we need to address that. You know, it's very easy, and we see this a lot in our patients where active range of motion of people's knees can get quite limited. You can go through your entire day and never straighten your knees fully or never bend your knees past 90. You know, we sleep in partial flexion. If you get up and you sit at the table and eat breakfast, you're at 90. You sit in your recliner at night, you're probably lacking about 20 degrees of like full extension. And so you can never straighten and bend your knees all the way. And so the number of people who we see who can hang out down here with, you know, their butt sitting on their heels is typically pretty limited. But when you're doing something, you know, thousands and thousands of times, if you're out there cycling for 2 or 3 hours, the number of pedal strokes you're taking should be really high. And so if every single one of those is going almost up to your very end range, it's going to take its toll on your cartilage and your joint.
And similarly, if we're on the table and we said, okay, bend your knee, and you could get your knee, you know, to here, but then we said, okay, at the wall and pull your heel towards your bottom. If you're like, you know, hanging out here because you haven't trained your hamstrings to activate in a shortened joint position, you're also at risk, because if you have the range in your joint to go through your pedal stroke and that's comfortable, but you haven't trained your muscles to really activate during those ranges of motion, again, you're just not supporting your joint as well as you could.
And that goes back to an example of mobility. You'd have the flexibility, but not the motor control to actually control it. Wrists, especially if you're on a mountain bike or flat bars, becomes an even bigger issue, both into wrist extension, but also, you know, if you've broken your wrist, you have to be able to fully pronate to get your hands on flat bars. Otherwise, you'll end up compensating somewhere else. And then shoulders on a road bike, it's pretty like mid-range you have to get to. But if you're talking about something like triathlon, where now you're having to come down into a much more restricted motion, shoulder range becomes a big issue. Hip flexion is, again, that ability to really actively get above 90. And we'll kind of see in the demo, like, can you actually get there? Neck extension, that ability to be in extension and have it feel okay. Thoracic spine extension, which is, again, bending back. Knee flexion, so bending your knee. Ankle dorsiflexion, as you're coming up and around that pedal stroke, can you keep your toe up? You shouldn't have to kind of fall into a plantar flexed position. Shoulder flexion, and then wrist extension and pronation there.
I wouldn't say that it trains your body enough. I think the training comes off the bike, and I think the more miles you do, and of course, if you're riding hills and you're strengthening your muscles, I don't want to present that picture. It's definitely a strength building thing, but you're still working within whatever your body is currently capable of. So if you're limited in hip flexion, for instance, you may be able to fit your bike to limit discomfort during hip flexion while you're riding, but a good bike fit wouldn't give you more hip flexion unless you worked on that outside. Does that make sense? You could do a faster or slower cadence. You could have more or less resistance based on what gear you're in, but it's still a uniform motion. I think what we look to do when we train people is to get outside that comfort zone to increase your performance once you go back to the bike. One of the things that training mobility and power and strength is the body's ability to generate force within itself. So if you're always pushing down or pulling up on a pedal, which is sort of an external thing, there's something to be said for being able to generate a large amount of force on your own, what's called an isometric, and train your nervous system to react and contract at your own command. So a lot of what we do when we train mobility is training the body, for instance, to be able to pull, get into hip flexion, hold it there yourself without, for instance, having a weight here that I'm pushing against. I'm generating the force on my own. And that is a slightly nuanced difference between always being on a machine versus training your own body to control itself.
Which is that front to back plane. A squat is in the sagittal plane. And really, our joints and our movements need to be trained in 3 dimensions. So while going through hip flexion and knee flexion is important, we would probably argue that actually training your hip rotation could be even more important for just general daily use of your body, and that oftentimes training those other planes will actually make that sagittal plane that we use a lot better. A hip that can rotate is typically a hip that can flex. A hip that can flex is not necessarily a hip that can rotate. And so it's getting you training outside of your sagittal plane where you tend to be strong, and that's going to make you an overall stronger athlete.
Yeah, and even when you get, I don't know if there's any mountain bikers in here, but when you get into a mountain biking, for instance, versus road biking where you have a drop post or you're out of the saddle somewhat, then again, the ability to control hip rotation and not just sagittal plane motion is very important, because you may not be rotating your hips literally in and out, but you're resisting that motion when you're out of the saddle, standing on your pedals. So it's important.
And so that's where some training needs to come off the bike in order to make you more efficient on the bike. So what we had planned was we were going to take you through kind of a movement demo where we can kind of clear the chairs away a little bit. And we're going to take you through what we refer to as morning routine, which is a routine, a 10-minute routine to help you maintain the joint range of motion of your entire body that you already currently have. Knowing that what we do throughout the day puts us in a deficit. It doesn't maintain pretty much any of the range of motion, and so making sure you move your joints through their full available range at least once, so that your nervous system remembers how to go there, your capsule realizes like, oh, it's important to have motion there. And then we're going to take you through a hip capsule stretch. And feel free to participate to whatever degree feels right for you. And if that's sitting and watching, that's fine.
Good morning. And I think Erin does too, is we go from the top down. So we start with neck movement and then go down to the foot and ankle. You could do really any way. If you're short on time, you could just do your troublesome joints, but it's kind of a nice routine to do in the morning. So we're going to start out just standing evenly on both feet. One idea that we'll talk about as we go along is an idea of irradiation. So the way I think we both like to describe irradiation to people is it's sort of priming your nervous system to turn on better. So if you think of all your muscles as having hundreds of little light switches inside of them that turn muscle fibers on and off, irradiation kind of helps to turn on more light switches, and we'll kind of talk about that now. So what I want everyone to do is just take a deep breath in, exhale, tighten your abs up. Those are right here. I want you to make fists with your hands. And I just want you to think about almost like turning everything on in your body. So you're creating tension in your body. Good, and then relax. Let's try that one more time. So everyone breathe in, exhale, tighten up your abs. Think about tightening up your calves and your thighs, your glutes, all the way up. Good. So that's kind of the state you want to be in when we go through each joint motion. The goal of these, they're called CARs, which stands for controlled articular rotation. So we're taking each joint in a controlled way through all of its articulations. So you want to do a little bit of that irradiation so that you're not compensating a lot. For instance, when we go to do shoulder blades, and I'm going to have you go up like this and then forward, I don't want to see everybody going like that. The goal is only to move your shoulder blade, and making the rest of your body tense helps you free up that one joint that we're working on. So that's just a baseline thing. You'll hear us talk about that quite a bit. Okay, so we're going to start off with neck. So I'm going to have everyone start off by looking down towards their feet. Good. And then you're just going to start turning your head to the right, nice and slow and easy. You're going to start side bending to the right and looking up toward the ceiling.
Another important thing to note here is if you have any pain, and that is in a closing angle, we want you to skip that.
Yeah. So for instance, let's start over there because I think everyone's off key. So what Erin's saying, which is correct, is if I bend my neck to the left here and I feel, ow, that pinches, we call that a pinch point, closing angle pain. That's a sign that perhaps you have a joint issue, probably needs a little bit of attention. On the other hand, if I feel a big stretch on this side, the open angle, that's okay, as long as you're comfortable with it. So as you're going around, if I get to here and I feel a pinch, what I'm going to do instead is just not go down as far and kind of avoid that part of my circle. Good. Okay, so go ahead and look down. Okay, everyone start off looking straight ahead. Perfect. Now we're going to go ahead and look down. Good. You're going to turn to your right. Look up to the sky. Good. Come back around. Try to keep your trunk pretty still, so you're just moving your neck. Good. Come on back to start. And then we're going to do the same thing to the other direction. So you're going to look down, look to your left, Come on back up. Good. And come back down. So, what's your name?
John.
John, do you mind if I pick on you?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I was watching John, mostly because he was right in front of me. And when he's going around, he's kind of doing this. So what that tells me about his neck is maybe one, it's stiff. I'd have to take a closer look to tell. Or number two, he just doesn't have good control over his joints in his neck, or maybe a combination of both. So what I would tell him to do maybe is do that at first in front of the mirror and really amp up his irradiation. And even if your range of motion becomes a lot smaller, try to learn how to control your circle within what you have. The next one that we like to do is shoulder blades, scapula. So for this one, the rules are make fists at your sides. Your fists are allowed to go up and down, but they're not allowed to come forward and back. And what we're basically going to do is make a big circle with our shoulder blades. So you're going to start off bringing your shoulders up towards your ears, and then you're going to try to bring your shoulders forward without letting your fists come forward. Good. And then you're going to push down. Good. And then pull your shoulder blades back. And then with your shoulder blades back, you're going to pull them back up towards your ears. So it kind of makes a circle. We're going to do that one more time. Down, back, up, forward. Good. And relax. And then you can do that again to the opposite direction. So you can start off going up, back, keep those elbows nice and straight, down, forward, and then up, back, down, and forward. Nice work. Okay, so the next one I like to do is full spine. And this one is a little challenging, but I think once you get the hang of it, it's one of the most useful ones in the morning routine. So what you're gonna do is give yourself a nice big hug. I'm gonna have Erin do one first so you guys can watch. So what you're gonna start off doing is bending forward from your trunk, but you wanna think about being inside almost like a barrel. Oh, it's okay. So what you wanna do is, you don't want to be doing hula hoop. That's what I call it. Your hips and your low back and your lower body should basically stay completely stable.
So we're this is where irradiation becomes more important.
Yeah.
To control that.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to watch Erin. So she's going to bend just her back forward. She's going to rotate to one side. Then she's going to bend to the side like she's going towards her back pocket. And then she's going to come back until she's facing the other direction, and then she's going to come back around. Awesome. Do you see how her hips basically don't move? Do you want to do one more?
Sure.
Okay, so bend forward, then to the right, back to your back pocket, come up and around. Again, her hips aren't coming forward when she does that, and then back. And you'll see that this requires quite a bit of abdominal and glute stability strength. So don't overthink it too much, but we'll talk you through it. So it starts off giving yourself a little hug. So think about keeping your abs tight, force going down into the ground, and you're just going to start rolling down a little bit forward. Good. And so then you're going to turn, we'll go to the right. So think about rotating more than twisting rather than bending to the side. Good.
So think of your shoulders, they have to twist.
Yep.
So your left one's coming towards your right leg.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times people from here want to do this because our rotational plane tends to be our weakest plane.
Right. Again, not a cycling motion, trunk rotation. Good. So then you're going to bend to the side towards your back pocket. And now try to lean back into back extension without letting your hips come forward.
They think lift your sternum up.
Yep. And similar to the neck, that may mean for you to control it that you may have to make a smaller circle. Good. And then you come all the way around until you're facing the other back pocket. and then you're going to come back around to the front. And come on up. So that one requires a little more coordination training than probably one repetition, but yeah, but it's a good one.
Let's go the other direction, and
Yeah.
Amy will walk us through it like at the speed that
Yeah.
we would normally have you do that, because that was really slow.
Yeah, really slow. Yeah, okay, so we're gonna bend forward, rotate to your left, turn to your back pocket, come back around into extension. Good, 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 till you're facing your other back pocket, and then back towards the front. Nice, better. So that'd be about the pace you would go with control.
And so normally in morning routine, we would have you do 2 to 3 repetitions, both directions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next one in the morning routine is shoulders. And Erin's going to demonstrate this one too. So what you're going to do is you're going to come straight up into shoulder flexion. You're going to turn your palm out to the side. That may be hard for some people. Just do what you can do. And then you're going to start reaching back behind your body as far as you can until you can't reach anymore. There you go. And then you're going to keep coming down until you end up with your palm out at your side. So you're in internal shoulder rotation. So we'll do that one again. Come on up. Good, palm out. Now this is where everyone wants to do this because most people don't have very good shoulder motion back into extension. So you just want to do what you can do while maintaining your body facing forward. Good. Good. And then you can go the opposite. You're going to reach back until you feel like you can't reach back anymore, and then turn your thumb toward the ceiling, and then come back up and around. Good. And you can do that a couple of times each direction on each arm. Sometimes on that one, we don't really have a good wall, but if you're one of those people who really is lacking in some of those extended positions, I'll actually do this against the wall so that I have a block. I sort of have a guide of where I'm going. And again, if you have the ability to do this for the first few days in front of a mirror, it really helps to show yourself where you're compensating, because what you feel and what's happening may not be synced up initially. I know for myself that's the case a lot of the time. Okay, so now we get to the fun stuff in the lower body, unless you want to do more shoulders.
Can we do that one more time?
Yeah, let's do it one more time.
Let's
Yeah,
do the other arm.
yeah.
How much where your thumb
Yeah,
is going.
we'll do it. Yeah, we'll do the other arm. So we're going to start off. Just bring thumb starts pointing up to the ceiling until you can't go anymore, wherever that is for you. Then you're going to point your palm out. Good. And then you're going to keep going back and around. So you're kind of trying to reach your thumb behind you, so it's pointing behind you.
And you're trying to continue to rotate that arm to get your palm as close to up as you can get.
Mm-hmm.
I'm confused by which way the turn is.
Yes.
Oh, that way. Okay.
Yeah, the way that feels the
So
worst.
that from here, you're going
Yeah.
to come back and around.
Mhm.
So your palm should be facing back, or if you have a lot of motion out.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So then to reverse, you would go back, trying not to let your body tip. When you hit that end range, you'll start to rotate your palm out so your thumb comes to pointing up. Cut that angle again, come up and around.
Good. Does that make more sense? Okay. So for hips, this one you might need your chair for balance, or you can just find a friend for balance. So one way to start off with these hip cars is to just break it down a little bit. So I'm going to have everyone just bring your knee into your chest and hold it. So that's knee flexion that we were just talking about before. Yep. Now think about a radiation. So think about pushing your other leg into the ground, tightening your abs, and now see if you can just let go with your arm and hold your knee up there.
Keep that left leg or the straight leg completely locked out.
Yep. Good, and lower it down. And then similarly, I'll have Erin show since I'm standing here. You're gonna do the same thing with bringing your hip out to the side. So grab your knee and pull your knee out to the side. This is a motion that most cyclists don't spend a lot of time in.
Most everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Unless you're John. So just go where you can go, and same thing, you're gonna grab onto your knee, wherever that is, and then try to let go and hold it there. So feel what kind of muscles have to turn on to hold yourself there without doing a lot of hip and trunk stuff. You might get a massive cramp in your tush, and that's okay. That's just your body saying, hey, I don't work in this range of motion normally, so I don't know what to do. And that's part of what training helps with. Okay, so full hip cars for morning routine. Do you want to use me as your balance? Okay. You're going to bring one knee, let's start with the right side, knee up towards your chest. Then you're going to bring it out to the side, as much as that is for you. You're going to try to bring your heel to the ceiling. That's hip internal rotation. And ideally you do that without letting your whole leg drop down. And then you're going to squeeze your heel towards your bottom and bring it back behind you. Good.
So oftentimes where people get that cramp is as you start to rotate.
Yeah.
Combining those motions, you know, any one of them we don't do a lot of at end range, and then you combine all three of them where you're lifting out to the side and you rotate, and you'll feel that kind of crampy motion. What a spasm or a cramp is your nervous system not knowing how to use that muscle in that range. So being the compassionate providers we are, we say we don't care.
Yeah. Say,
We want you to fight through that a
Yeah.
little bit, because that's how you're going to train it to eventually have and gain that control. So
that motion again.
yeah. So
yeah, so you're going to go up, out to the side, heel up, back behind you, and down. And it's important to note that this actually requires some other things to go on too, one of which is to control your lumbar spine movement and your hip and have them be independent. So if you're getting a little sore back from that, what you want to do is make your circle smaller, because if you think you have tons of hip extension but you're really just doing that, you actually don't have hip extension. You maybe only have this much hip extension. So I'll show on Erin doing that. So yeah, so if you're going to bring your knee up to your chest and then out to the side, again, she's trying not to bring her left hip around, and then she's going to try to bring her heel up. And then as she brings her leg back behind her, do it wrong. If she was going to be like that, we would say, okay, don't do that. Bring your knee less into your extension there, or your hip rather, and just work within what you have. I think that's one of the biggest tenets of this whole morning routine idea, is you want to perfect your control with what you have before, and then we're going to show you other ways to work on expanding your range of motion. But by kind of compensating and cheating your way through it, you're really not helping yourself at all. It potentially causes more problems. Okay, so that's hip. Do you guys want to go through that one more time? Other side. Okay, so knee to the chest. Good. Knee out to the side. No shame in holding onto a chair. Good. Heel up to the sky. And then try to squeeze that heel towards your butt as much as you can. Back behind you. And then down. Good. So it's just like a big circle. And actually, it can be noted too that you can actually do this on your hands and knees too. If you don't feel comfortable on one leg, you can do your knee to your chest, out to the side, and back like that as well. It's really the same thing, just a slightly different position. That's a good segue into knees. So we're going to have you all sit down.
you can be in your chair.
Yeah.
If getting on and off the floor is hard, that's fine.
So this one may be hard for some of you to get in this position, so we can offer some other examples. But what you're going to do is grab, if we're going to do the left side, or we'll do the right side because that's what Erin's doing. We're going to put your right knee over your right forearm there. And then you're going to grab your bicep on the left side and essentially put your knee in a chokehold.
So they try to have you like lock out your hip as much as possible. If that's here,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Or if you're at home and you're here lying on the ground, that's also totally fine. So the point of these knee rotations are to really, it really focuses a lot on rotation, which is a movement of the knee that most people don't even know exists. So what you want to do is start just in a comfortable position, and then you're going to bring your heel towards your bottom as much as you feel like you can. Obviously your arm is blocking, so you're not going to be as far as maybe some people can go. And then what I want you all to do is bring your whole foot in towards your midline.
Pull your toes up
Yep.
to lock your ankle. And the idea is if you put your fingers like on the ridge of your shin, you should feel that whole ridge rotate in as your foot reaches in.
And if it doesn't, then we can talk about that at the end. Okay, so then you're going to straighten your leg as much as you can. I doubt that many of us are going to get our leg straight, including me. So then you're going to bring your whole foot out, and again, you want that ridge on your shin to rotate out. And then you're going to bring your heel down. So at real time speed, it looks like this. Toe in, straight, toe out, down, and in again. And then you can,
we would reverse.
So toe out, straight, foot in, heel to your bottom.
So you're coupling the rotational motion with flexion and extension both ways.
Mm-hmm.
So we can try that on the other leg.
Yep.
So dorsiflex, pull that ankle up, rotate your foot in, kick up, rotate your foot out, pull down. Rotate in, kick up, rotate out, and down. So switch, rotate out, kick up, rotate in, and down. One more, rotate out and up, rotate in, and down.
Okay, so then the last one that we like to do is the ankle. So for this one, it's helpful to, again, feel that little ridge on your shin, because for this one, you don't want that to move at all. So we're really just trying to isolate pure ankle movement. So I'll talk Erin through it. So basically, you're going to start off bringing your toes in. And again, you don't want to feel this going back and forth. You're really just pulling your toes in. Then you're going to bring your toes toward the floor, toes away from you. This is often a stiff movement towards your outer side, and then up. Toe in, all the way to the floor, out, and up. And then you would reverse. So toes down and out, toes in, up, out, down, in. And then you would do the other side. Toes up, in, down, out. You're just almost like drawing a little box with your toes. Down, out, and up. And then down, toes in, pull up, toes out, down, in, pull up, and out. So once you get good at that, and actually I think Erin on her Facebook page has the whole morning routine in a video that we can point you guys to. It should take about 10 minutes depending on how slow you move through it, and it actually feels really good once you get the hang of it to just go through your range of motion every day.
You know, a common thing I've heard from clients I've worked with is all of those little achy, oh, my elbow's bothering me, oh, this bothers me, start to go away. Because you start to challenge your joints, you start to move your joints through the motions that they don't typically move through. And that's what causes a lot of that myofascial pain
Tightness.
and trigger points is just lack of movement.
I would say, especially from a cycling perspective, going through neck and spine cars, so doing, getting into that back extension, I've had people tell me that alone basically cured their neck and back pain, because it's just really, it's so much simpler than than people think it is. Just moving your joints through their motion every day the way that they were intended is already taking you so far in your rehab, because just working within your comfort zone isn't going to really move the dial that much.
I had thoracic outlet.
Oh yeah, I've had that.
Yeah, and it was just amazing, just all the manipulations and then making sure I do my exercises that seemed to really help.
That's great. Yeah. Do you guys want to go through some hip capsule stuff? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll show kind of two versions. We'll show the modified version as well as kind of the just like normal version. So in a true modified for this first one, you would probably be up on a table, which we don't really have here. So everyone who can be on the floor, let's go right hip forward. And so we're gonna come into what we refer to as 90-90. If you feel like that's a hard position for you to get into, especially for your back knee, that's what you can adjust. So you can pull this forward and make that back knee comfortable. But with your front leg, what we want to make sure is that you're really truly creating a 90-degree angle with your pelvis. And then if you feel like you can't quite reach, we've got some yoga blocks that we can kind of help you with. So with your hands on either side, I want you to think of lifting your sternum up like you're coming up against a wall. With your left hip, you're trying to drive the front of your hip around forward so that you really are truly making that 90-degree angle with that front leg. And then I want you to drag your belly button forward. Will you give her a yoga block for under her knee? So you're dragging forward, think about trying to lift your tailbone up to the sky as you're pulling this front leg back into your back hip. Do you feel that in your right butt posterior hip?
Gotta go through those steps again.
Okay, so the idea is that you're pulling that belly button forward over that front leg. You're trying to be up against a wall, so your right shoulder should be in line with your right knee if possible. And then think about rotating the left side of your pelvis around forward. So do you feel that?
You're supposed to feel it in the right.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Feel that? And do you feel it? Okay. Did you feel it as, okay. So this is where, once you feel that stretch, we would have you hold for 2 minutes. So this is the part of that law of progressive adaptation where there has to be a long hold in order for connective tissue to make a permanent change. So the idea then is, after that 2 minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to train your brain to fire and contract on either side of that stretch. So those are what we refer to as PALS and RAILS contractions. So PALS stands for progressive articular isometric load. RAILS stands for regressive articular isometric load. So the progressive load, we're always pushing out of the stretch. We're firing the tissue we've just been stretching. The regressive is we're pulling into the stretch. So how is that feeling? Will you help him rotate his pelvis around?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still.
So this is going to go more like that if you can.
Okay.
If you can, I would bring this knee forward a little bit more. Here we go. So you should feel it back of your butt on that side.
Yep. I got it.
Okay. Are we on PALS?
So the first thing we have to do as we prepare for our PALS contraction is to irradiate. We need to create tension. So everything that's touching the floor, I want you to kind of drive into the floor. Drive your arms down into the floor. Create that stiffness through your body. Now start driving your front leg, that whole length of your shin, down into the floor. So pushing down as hard as you can. So we're slowly building that up. Should be at a 50% effort. Come up to a 75% effort. Now really try to push that floor away. 100%, your greatest, safest effort. Trying to increase those motor units, flip on more of those light switches and teach that muscle how to work in that end range. Slowly letting go. So ramp back down. Now we're going to go into that rails contraction. Think about pulling that belly button forward more. Trying to lift that front leg up off the ground. You shouldn't move. You should be at end range. You're just trying to fire all of the muscles on that closing angle. Your abdominals, your adductors. Pull up. Greatest, safest effort. And relax.
So you can see how this gets back to some of the sciencey stuff Erin was talking about in the beginning, where unlike the morning routine where you're just maintaining your range of motion and going through it, this is really meant to load your joint and progressively load it in specific directionality to increase the strength of the tissue and increase your ability to fire those muscles at end range. So 2 different points, I guess, of each exercise. This kind of stuff, building range of motion, building control. Morning routine is maintaining what you have.
Okay, so now we'll show 2 versions. So the true 90-90 version would be from that position, you would take your body and you're going to try to rotate it towards your back leg. So this is the one that feels pretty good, like a butt stretch. This is the one that makes you feel like the wishbone on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
So this is true like joint capsule. It's hard. You kind of have to work towards being able to get into this where your right hand is going to grab your left hip. Your left hand is trying to reach towards your ankle.
And again, if you have pinching,
Closing pinch pain, we're avoiding that. That's joint. So the modification towards that is from like your chair or from a seated position, create about a 90-degree angle. And you're going to rotate, stick your foot outside of your kind of base of support, and you're going to rotate your hip in to what we call kind of a sleeper stretch position. So from here, you're trying to rotate down.
and you should feel that kind of in here. If you're feeling it still pinching in the front.
Or if you're staying in your 90-90, you can come to here. And where you should feel this is through kind of your lateral posterior hip.
And again, you also don't want knee pain, so if you're getting knee pain in here, then we'll monitor.
Yeah, let us know. So you can use your hand, you can use your other leg just as a little bit of overpressure. You're not really pulling into it hard, it's just kind of sinking down. But you need to keep your sit bone glued to the ground. From there. And try and keep that right sit bone glued down. Do you feel that through kind of your lateral hip? Yep, so just holding that.
It's okay to help us like this.
Yep. So from here, you'd hold for 2 minutes.
That's the yoga zen portion of this 2-minute long hold.
Or for the high schoolers, the time that they're allowed to talk.
Yeah.
You know, oftentimes when we're starting with patients, like we're having to create a lot of stability through their hip to even be able to get into any type of rotation because they tend to be so tight and restricted that it's hard to start creating this stretch without just feeling kind of a pinch or stuff in their knee. You know what, when you feel it in the inside of your knee, what that is you've used up all of the hip motion a long time ago, and now you're torquing down through that next joint, and we don't want that. So we don't stretch your hip at the expense of your knee. So create that irradiation. Think about pushing down into the ground. So now with your outside of your leg, you're trying to pull out of that for your pales contraction. Your other leg or your hand is resisting. You're slowly building that up. So we're at a 50% contraction. Trying to fire all that tissue we've been stretching. Good. Come up to a 75% contraction. And now your greatest, safest effort. As hard as you can, teach that hip how to fire there. And slowly ramp that down. And for your rails, you're going to think about trying to pull that knee away from your other leg or your hand, trying to pull into the stretch even more. Building up to your greatest, safest effort. And relax. So from this position, let's just go straight to the other side, and then we'll go into a 90 on that leg. So the other thing that can really help if you're feeling it in your knee is to dorsiflex. Lock your tibia from your ankle, and that helps kind of lock up your knee a little bit. So the hardest part of all of this is probably actually making yourself do it for 2 minutes. Yeah. It's a really long time to hold a stretch. So we would normally be like using a stopwatch. When I do this with cross country or some of the other high school teams, I have a stopwatch that I'm actually timing it for them. The other thing you can do is you can be against a wall, where if you can lean back against that, then it's easier to use your hand if, you know, this hip is tight and it's hard for you to get that over, then you can be here and feel more balanced. For people who get a lot of pinching, the further back you come, the more you open that up to try to create some mobility. Whereas as you get more and more, we would want you more upright. Once you can be really upright, then we want you to try to go towards 90-90. Although I find that even once I could get into 90-90 and do the stretch, I do both ways. I just kind of vary it. I think you kind of hit different areas of the capsule, and the more your hip capsule moves, the happier the rest of your body is going to be, just because that tightness really tends to like build up and beat up other areas.
And if you really can't find a way to get a stretch in any of these positions without pinching, that's a sign that you should probably see a therapist, because you probably just need, like Erin was saying, you need some manual therapy to get your joint moving, some external force on it that you can't provide on your own. I wouldn't just crank into it even though it hurts. That would be a bad choice.
Okay, so let's irradiate. So drive down into the floor. Create that neuromotor drive through your whole system. Try to rotate your leg out, building up to about 50% of your max. 75% of your max. And now up to your greatest, safest effort. And Slowly ramp that down. Start pulling into your rails contraction, trying to pull that leg away from your other leg or your hand. Teach that joint how to rotate into that new end range. You could go into a second long hold there. From your rails, the key is to not spring out, but then if you're doing a second long hold is to stay there and let that position that you just pulled into be your new position of hold, to really try to lengthen that tissue. So again, that's the your joint feels a little bit like the wishbone on Thanksgiving. Oftentimes I'll have the high school kids come out and just kind of shake their joint out. It's the deepest capsule or the deepest tissue in that joint, and so you feel it.
Discomfort is good, pain is bad. So you have to kind of be your own boss on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then the last thing we would have you do is come into 90-90 on the opposite side and do this forward stretch.
So you want your knee and your ankle also in 90. That was one of the things I was adjusting on a lot of you is you want your thigh coming out at 90, but then you want this hip ideally at 90, and then your ankle and dorsiflexion at 90, and similarly on the back leg. And again, if we need to change things up.
Yeah, modify the back leg to wherever you need to be. Really try to rotate the right side of your pelvis around forward. Think about pulling your femur back into the socket.
Everyone looks so good now that they've done it from the other side.
As you get more motion, what we want you to watch is we're trying to get you out of this leaning to the side and getting your body up and in line with your leg. Okay, so now create that irradiation. Push your leg, that whole border of your shin, down into the ground. Fire that glute, fire that hip muscle to push you out of it, out of the stretch. You're trying to push the ground away. Slowly relax. And try to lift that leg now. Come into your rails contraction. Pull your belly button forward. Lift your tailbone to the sky. And relax. So come on out of there. So you've stretched your capsule both directions. One of the things I like to have people do is to come either into figure 4 or into middle splits and then just train your rotation. So putting your hip in a position that it doesn't normally go to. Most of us don't hang out in middle splits very often. And if you feel really like you're gonna fall back, come into figure 4. Where I want you to think this motion needs to come from your hip. Rotate deep, pull from deep to come forward. Rotate from your butt to go back.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that's cool about this stuff is really learning your body a little better and figuring out, oh, my muscles are supposed to make that movement. I'm not just kind of flopping my leg back and forth. It's pulling actively in and then pulling out of it using your glutes and other backside stuff.
But training that and seeing you'll eventually get more and more range. And then having people go back and test their flexion. And very often after both of those things, your range, your active range is better. So doing that kind of on both sides. A lot of times people will have a direction that they're like, how do I get my foot to go in at all?
Or one side.
one side is way more restricted than the other. And so then it's fighting to make symmetry, whether that's direction of one leg or side to side, look better. So asymmetry is one of the biggest risk factors for injury. So anything that decreases pain is great, especially if your kidneys and liver don't have to process it. So I think I can speak for both Amy and myself. We don't believe it's actually lengthening the IT band. It changes tone of the underlying muscle. It decreases pain. We have the cross-country team foam roll all the time. It's kind of the science behind it, though, of it's not making permanent changes.
Right.
And so it's just that idea behind it. If it makes your knee pain go away, great. It's a useful tool, but it is the idea of like rolling on your IT band is not making your IT band longer. Right. Even a lot of the IT band stretches that are given, I don't think we believe make your IT band longer.
Part of that is just knowing your anatomy. I mean, your IT band is really just a very thick connective tissue that attaches from the proximal part of your hip to your distal, the distal attachment. That tissue itself, none of you have probably done gross anatomy, but it's not really a stretchy muscle-like tissue. So really, you have to ask yourself, why am I having pain there? I might argue it's because your hip capsule is tight, possibly, and that tissue's under tension. It's taking more load than it can at that particular time. So again, I agree with Erin. If foam rolling alleviates that pain temporarily, then by all means foam roll. But you still are going to have to get at the underlying cause of why you're having that problem in the first place.
Erin Chadburn. My clinic is called Fit to Live, so I'm located here on Bainbridge Island. And this is...
Yep. My name's Amy Wrights, and my clinic is called Groundwork Physio. We both work out of an office that's currently located on Bijou, 123 Bijou Drive, Southeast. You can contact either of us for more information. Our cards are there. Our emails are up there. In the future, we will also be teaching some classes that work on a lot of this mobility stuff. So if you're interested in that, maybe we'll have a little sign-up sheet or something for the future. But you can always call us and ask questions. We both are passionate about the topic. Yeah.
So thank you for
Thank
joining
you guys.
us.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
One of the things, and just with Erin gave me some of the things to do in the mornings, because I said, God, I'm stiff all the time. What's going on? And the next day, after just doing it twice, it was like my back wasn't stiff anymore when I woke up in the morning. So it really has a lot of benefit and things. And she got me to be able to use my left arm, which I retore a bunch of things and thought I was going to be destined to just walk around like this. So really a lot of very good processes the way they're practicing. So it's really great. So very happy you guys are doing.
Thanks for hosting, Tom.
Yeah, thank you.
You bet. Thanks for coming. Tell your friends.
Yeah.